Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I don't know about you, but it's pretty beautiful in Santa Cruz, but this is pretty nice. This is pretty cool. Welcome to our Inspire series, the first of its kind opportunity to connect with our slug community and hear from some of our most interesting faculty members from UC Santa Cruz. What an absolute joy to be here tonight with alumni. Where are the alumni in the audience? Raise your hand. Parents of our students, raise your hand. So good to see all of you. Friends from across our campus community, we're just honored to host you tonight. My name is John Pine. I'm the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Alumni Engagement at UC Santa Cruz, and it's my pleasure to welcome you. The UC Santa Cruz Alumni Association is over 150,000 strong, with several thousand right here in San Diego. We host programs here in San Diego, we host programs across the country, and of course, in Santa Cruz. So I encourage you to stay connected and learn about all the things that we do here and across the state. Now, before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to introduce just a couple people in the room tonight. So one of our members of the Board of Trustees, Jim Gunderson. Jim, if you're here, raise your hand real high. There's Jim over there. And then some members of our faculty and staff that are here scattered through the audience, just raise your hand real high. So make sure you look for some of these folks because I want you to get involved with us at Santa Cruz. Maybe you can learn a little bit about us from one of the folks that are here today. So let's talk about the future of UC Santa Cruz. I must say I've never been more excited about our great university. Our newest strategic plan, completed just under a year ago, has set us on a more focused path as a global research institution leading at the intersection of social justice and innovation. So let's watch a very short video right up here to learn a little bit more about that plan. Take it away.
UC Santa Cruz is on an incredible trajectory. For nearly 6 decades, the innovative research and creative scholarship done on our campus has expanded and challenged how we understand the world. We are charting a course that builds on our long-standing strengths, and we're identifying ways we can achieve even more. Our new strategic plan, Leading the Change, will guide our work for the next decade. This shared vision builds on 5 core themes. We will provide more hands-on learning opportunities for undergraduate students while expanding offerings for elective courses in the colleges and divisions. We will pursue new programs that support graduate student success, their professional development, and career goals. We will grow our impact by enabling more interdisciplinary collaborations by strengthening our research infrastructure. We will work to advance an inclusive and supportive environment by creating a campus culture rooted in diversity, equity, and inclusion, improving our hiring practices, and fostering a sense of belonging. We will work intentionally to address the impacts of climate change and plot a course to decarbonize our campus while continuing to carefully steward our land and water resources. We see an even better future ahead with the intentional and dedicated work of everyone in our campus community. That vision will become our reality. Join us on this exciting journey. Learn more at strategicplan.ucsc.edu.
Pretty great, right? Yeah, we should applaud for that. Amazing. I love that video. It just gives me a chance to really reflect on how amazingly beautiful our campus is. I know everyone wants to come back and hug a redwood tree whenever they watch that video. I know I always do. My apologies, I missed one of our trustees here tonight. Greg Reyes is here as well. Greg, if you're here, just raise your hand. There he is. I'm sorry, Greg, that I missed you. I have some sad news. Unfortunately, Chancellor Larive could not be with us tonight because of the ongoing campus activities. She needed to remain on campus. She sends her best wishes and a wonderful substitute in her place and promises to return to San Diego very soon. So it is my honor to introduce Dr. John McMillan, our Vice Chancellor for Research and a professor in the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry at UC Santa Cruz. Dr. McMillan leads a research lab focused on discovering and understanding molecules from microorganisms. His work has led to the identification of over 100 new natural substances with potential medical benefits, particularly in treating infections and cancer. Notably, his contributions include the development of a medication approved for VHL syndrome and other types of cancer. John holds a PhD in chemistry from another University of California. We don't hold it against him. That is Davis. And a BS in chemistry from the University of Iowa. He's spent time right here in San Diego as a postdoc research associate at the Scripps Institute of Oceanography. So he's a little bit back home here, right, John? So join me in welcoming Dr. John McMillan.
All right. Well, thank you very much, John, for the introduction, and a good evening to all of you. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I'm excited, to be in this amazing aquarium. I mean, how beautiful is this? But at the same time, I'll encourage all of you to come back to Santa Cruz and visit the Seymour Center, which has gone through some renovations, thinking about climate change and how that impacts, and very hands-on for kids. And also, while you're there, you can go down the coast a little bit and visit the Monterey Bay Aquarium, which is also another beautiful aquarium as well. We really thank you for being supporters of UC Santa Cruz. Our network of alumni, parents, and friends is already strong and growing even stronger. Having people like John Pine to really bring people together also helps a whole lot on that front. We really appreciate your connections to our campus and being such vocal advocates for UC Santa Cruz and the UC system. Yeah, although Chancellor Larive couldn't be here, she definitely extends her hospitality to all of you. I know she likes to talk about research. It's something that she's very passionate about as well, but I get to be here to talk about what my true passion is, which is research and helping drive the research engine of UC Santa Cruz in as many ways as possible. And that's really driven by our undergraduate students, our graduate students, our staff, and our faculty working together to solve real-world problems. I'm going to take a personal liberty since I'm here. One of my former PhD students is in the audience, and Jocelyn Macho was a truly outstanding graduate student that really inspired me to continue doing the work that we do in our own lab. But moving on, UC Santa Cruz continues on a remarkable trajectory. We have a track record of groundbreaking, multidisciplinary research, distinguished scholarship, creativity, community activity, and innovation. Our faculty make an impact not just by advancing their fields. They help us to imagine what the world can be. They view their research through the lens of creating a more sustainable, just, inclusive, and equitable world. That is what makes our university quite unique, bringing all of those things together. And as we'll hear about with climate change, you can't deal with climate change by engineering a solution. You can't research your way out of it without involving communities and having communities in the discussion to solve those problems. Climate change has been debated by academics for decades, but the fast emerging reality of climate change and its wide-ranging impacts have rapidly and rightfully made it one of the most pressing issues of our time. Our Center for Coastal Climate Resilience, which we just started in the last year and a half or so, was born out of the need to build coastal resilience in the face of a problem literally at UC Santa Cruz doorstep. Our faculty, staff, and students are deep in this work, developing creative ways to address the issue, examining, and in some cases already implementing nature-based solutions, advancing adaptations, supporting climate justice, and so much more. The Inspire series was born out of a desire to pull back the curtain on the work unfolding on our campus. Climate resilience is an ideal topic to talk about. And this evening, we hope to spark some new connections with you and between us as a campus, and encourage you to engage in this conversation. If you have students attending UC Santa Cruz, we're happy to help find ways for them to get involved in climate resilience research. Come back and talk to the researchers and what's happening across our campus, see what's happening in real time. When was the last time you felt inspired? When was the last time you learned something new? When was the last time you pushed the boundaries of your understanding of complex issue? That's what our faculty and students do every day at UC Santa Cruz. Tonight's panel discussion with 3 outstanding faculty will give you a taste of just how invigorating that mind-expanding experience can be. It's my pleasure to introduce our 3 distinguished guests. First, I'll introduce Miriam Greenberg, Professor of Sociology. Come on up. Mike Beck, Director of the Center for Coastal Climate Resilience and the AXA Chair in Coastal Resilience. and Javier Gonzalez-Rocha, an assistant professor of applied mathematics. All right, well, thank you, the three of you, for being here and getting a chance to tell us about the incredible work you do and the way you think about problems. You all work in discrete areas of climate change. So to start, I'd ask each of you to just kind of give us an elevator pitch description of your research, roughly 30 seconds, although I'm not going to time you. I know some of you can talk for quite a while, so I will maybe keep an eye on the time a little bit. So Miriam, why don't you start?
Sure. I'll do my best. Can everyone hear me? There we go. Hi. Thank you so much, John, and it's really an honor to be here with all of you in San Diego. My work currently is looking at the growth of the wildlands-urban interface, the WUI, as it's now referred to in California, and particularly with a focus in our own region of Santa Cruz and the four-county area around on the Central Coast. And WUI growth has been an enormous concern in relation to climate change, given in particular the growth of the commute shed that it creates and the greenhouse gas emissions that are a result of that commute shed, as well as its impact on wildfire, which itself has all kinds of climate impacts. And my interest in the growth of the WUI is also related in this kind of interdisciplinary fashion with my prior research on the concomitant rise of the housing crisis in California. So I'm interested in understanding the relationship between housing pressures and the housing crisis with the growth of the WUI, and how addressing the climate and WUI issues will require also addressing housing and equity issues associated with that crisis. Thanks.
Mike.
Hey, good evening, everybody. It's awesome to be around all the sea creatures and you. So, real pleasure to be here. What we do in the Center for Coastal Climate Resilience is assess coastal risks. We value the benefits of nature, like reefs and wetlands, for reducing those risks to people, property, and nature. And then we use that rigorous valuation to be able to identify incentives to invest in the conservation and the restoration of those habitats. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is to redirect hundreds of billions of dollars that would go into gray infrastructure, like seawalls, into green infrastructure, providing benefits to both people and nature.
Thank you, Mike. Javier.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'll state it boldly. So I'm really excited about exploring how we can use aerial robotic systems, or what people know as drones, to combat climate change. And really, I'm excited about developing this community to empower communities to, one, understand what are the driving forces that are causing climate change. So a lot of my focus is placed on developing sensing technologies that can help us understand where are emissions taking place. And then once we understand where emissions are taking place, quantify them so that then we can do something. We can do some mitigation. And once we mitigate, we can use the same technology to assess how effective these strategies are. And more recently, I've been also exploring or opportunities for using this technology to not only detect and quantify emissions of greenhouse gases, but also assess the impacts of climate change. Specifically, I'm very much interested in the Pájaro Valley, which is an agricultural community, really understanding how wildfires are worsening the air quality that farm workers are breathing, and using this technology to quantify that. So that's just a little bit more, and I'll say more during this conversation.
Fantastic, thank you. So we'll actually just dive in a little bit deeper now on that, and maybe you can continue. There's so many different issues around climate change that we're all facing. What do you see as the most pressing issue surrounding climate change and resilience? And how are you kind of taking a multidisciplinary approach to address that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the big problems is, specifically going back to this case of farm workers in the Pájaro Valley, one of the big problems is, one, marginalized communities are not integrated in the process of designing, deploying, and managing technology. And that's very problematic. So what ends up happening is that marginalized communities, at the end of the day, have to adapt technologies that were not designed for them to sort of fend themselves against climate change. And we've done phenomenal, but imagine the potential if we actually develop community-centered solutions. So one of the things that I've been doing in partnership with local organizations is that we've started to create focus groups, and this was already inspired on some of the work that communities themselves are doing. So one of the things we're going to be doing soon is a photo voice project. They just recently did one that was focused on climate change. We're going to focus it on air pollution because we want to hear it from the community. The community already knows where the focuses are or where the emissions are, right? So that's the first step. And then the second step is really understanding what are the things that work as far as relaying information, right? And it's very new. We're learning a lot, but there's a lot to do in this space. And I think the first step is to recognize is that we genuinely need community-centered solutions.
Great, thank you. Miriam, maybe I'll ask you to kind of follow up on that and kind of ask the same question about the issues. I'm guessing wildfire in the WUI is going to be what you talk about. But to follow along with that community engagement, you recently received a UC Climate Action grant that has a lot of community partnership and have received additional funding from the state because of the work you do in community engagement for that scholarship. So maybe make a few comments about that.
Sure, thanks. And picking up on what Javier was saying, I think it's such a great point that you know, we can learn so much more collaboratively from folks that are really experiencing on the front lines of climate change every day, and what does it mean to collaborate through research as well with those communities. So that is something that we are seeking to do in this project, which is called WUI Research for Resilience, and it's looking at the intersection of issues of climate change, conservation, and the affordable housing crisis. And we are doing a few different things. One has to do with a survey project throughout the broader region around Santa Cruz. And it's, I should say, survey and ethnography in collaboration with community bridges and different community-based family service organizations in different parts of the WUI and I often end up kind of doing a little bit of interpretive dance when I demonstrate the region, but from Davenport in the north to the San Lorenzo Valley, and people who are have been in Santa Cruz will know what I'm talking about, to the Pajaro Valley to the south, Salinas Valley further south as well. And these are really areas that are rapidly growing and yet are incredibly dangerous to live right now, as we know from the CZU fire from 2020, as well as massive storm systems that came through in 2023, as well as the Pajaro River flood. And yet there are communities, there are people moving to these areas, and there are communities that are remaining in these areas, and we want to understand why. So we're collaborating with local organizations to really talk with people both about why they're there, why perhaps they've been there for a long time, why they've moved there, as well as why they're staying there and what their needs are in these areas. And to what degree, if they had the wherewithal and the means, would they move to safer urban areas? And so that's kind of been the focus of a lot of that research, along with some more ethnographic work. We're doing other kinds of more fire ecology projects also with Yamamutsun Land Trust, which I could speak more about, having to do with habitat restoration in these areas and what it would require also to work collaboratively with local communities to enable the return of stewardship practices by local tribes. So, thanks. Yeah, thanks.
Mike, same question. What do you view as some of the biggest challenges that we're facing?
Yeah, well, as both Javier and Miriam said, I mean, climate change is here. It is no longer a problem of the future. We are facing it in communities all around the state, and in particular, in many nations, some of the most vulnerable people are those who have contributed the least to climate change and are feeling some of the greatest impacts. And That's why we're working with many of those communities to understand what those risks are and to identify where, for example, nature may be able to help reduce those risks, and then work on things like reef conservation, mangrove reforestation, other practices like this, as well as strategies, as we've been discussing here, that actually help communities reduce their social vulnerabilities as well, so they can handle some of these risks better.
So I'm going to follow up a little bit on that too with you, based on a conversation we had this morning, so I'm putting you on the spot. We talked a little bit this morning around the importance of visualization and showing people what these changes are going to look like in different ways. Can you comment a little bit more on how your research around modeling and others brings visualization and art and the ability to really see what is coming forward?
Yeah, well, one of the things that I think is awesome and that you helped to establish in the center is the work all across campus, that climate change isn't just about the science, and our team does a fair bit of science, but it's also being able to connect the work done in all divisions across campus, from arts to engineering. Just as you highlighted, a student, Jessie Kendall Barr, is here in the audience. She was a grad student and is a postdoc here, and also a co-PI on one of our center projects where we're helping to better be able to visualize these risks, to understand what does it mean if we lose reefs and we see more waves impacting our coastline. That's something that you don't see, that we're losing those reefs, and you don't recognize that that means greater flooding, greater risks to communities, and that's what we're trying to figure out how to convey. You've probably seen sea level rise maps, but sea level rise is still a problem of 2050. If you've seen the news about storms, you've experienced the storms around here, we're seeing impacts from waves now. So if we don't understand what those risks are, don't appreciate that climate change is really driving them already, we won't act soon enough. And that's what we're doing with visualizations to help.
Thank you. So this is maybe a little bit of a harder question, but I think let each of you take a stab at it. What makes UC Santa Cruz work in this area unique? So what makes UC Santa Cruz stand out?
Should I go? Okay. Well, one of the things I like to think about is, I'm an urbanist, an urban sociologist, and and people have often said to me when I came from New York to Santa Cruz, and I actually grew up in the area, but then I came back, why would an urbanist be studying in Santa Cruz? And a lot of people have this notion that it's not a city, but of course it is very much, and there are, urban areas on the Central Coast, but what's so fascinating, and those urban areas, by the way, are growing, exponentially as a result of the urbanization out from Silicon Valley, and then meanwhile, those urban areas are interacting in this really kind of concentrated area with the Monterey Bay Sanctuary, with the agricultural areas of the Pajaro and Salinas Valleys, with the wildland areas of the Santa Cruz Mountains, which is a global biodiversity hotspot. And so we have these interactions in this very concentrated way of urban and environmental systems and social systems and rural systems within an area that's like the space of a mid-sized metropolitan area, providing this incredible laboratory for analysis, as well as, of course, the traditions of community engagement and and of collaboration between the university and communities in the area that allow us to study these things. So it's been an unequaled area for us to really do this kind of research. Thanks.
Javier, I know you're fairly new to campus.
Yeah.
But how do you feel that the unique way UC Santa Cruz is positioned for this work?
Yeah, well, I want to double down on what Miriam said, in the sense that, so I've been here since July. And that blend in geography or landscape, I sort of see it happen on campus with disciplines.
Yeah.
And for me, it's meant a lot for multiple labs to have opened their doors for me to come and present my research and then think about how we can collaborate. And to me, that's very exciting because other places I've seen that people were a little bit more rigid. They would stick more to their areas of research. So that would be one thing, just the flexibility, not just flexibility, but this actually seeding of collaboration across disciplines. But the other very meaningful thing, and it means a lot to me because I grew up in Watsonville, is the willingness of researchers at UC Santa Cruz to come down to the community. So we were just at an event, and to our surprise, there were about 3-4 faculty, right? And we had not planned to come to this event, right?
Yeah.
But we all met at this event because we cared about this issue. And for me, that's just it sparks a catalyst for collaboration, creativity, and impact. And so in my 1 year, that's very thrilled. It feels like I'm at a good place. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Mike, same question for you.
Yeah, well, I've actually been on campus almost 25 years, but for 20 of those years, I was employed by the Nature Conservancy, and so my primary job was as lead marine scientist for the Conservancy, and to be very honest with you, I was amazed that campus opened up its doors so readily to me when I was a young scientist with the Nature Conservancy, and I have had a great experience. I stepped back from the Conservancy about 5 years ago, put on my research professor hat, and directing the center. But campus has allowed me to come to this work with a real practical bent of problem solving, working with communities, and you see that all across campus. And so that's what's been, I don't feel out of place despite the fact that I've been a practitioner for all of my career in this. And so that's what I've most appreciated about campus.
You. So the next question is going to turn a little more personal. I think it's always important for our students and for people that are connected to know the stories about why people get into what they do. And I think that motivation impacts how we teach, how we mentor, how we affect the next generation of people moving forward. So maybe just ask a kind of a brief, how did you land in the position and the research path that you've taken? Maybe we'll start at the other end, Mike, and work back this way.
Well, I'm an ecologist by training, and right now I oversee a team mostly of engineers and economists as we try to understand how important nature is in breaking waves and protecting people in nature. But I actually came to all of this work as an experimental ecologist, raised that I had to study something that I could replicate, these small little quadrats in the Rocky Intertidal when I was working at the University of Sydney. And so I had all this reductionist work there, and then I joined the Nature Conservancy, and they said, yeah, well, what we need to do is develop a plan to conserve the Gulf of Mexico. Can you do that? And, I was like, you mean me? I said, okay, we'll give that a try. What I've found, both about the way that I approach work is that I really enjoy problem solving. I really enjoy unique and different problems. I appreciated all that we could do in being able to work on all these different kinds of approaches. And then that's what I've also brought to the training of students on campus as well. I really enjoy if a student, or for example, a grad student, has their thesis under control, they know what they're doing, and I say, hey, do you also want to work on another area as well? Because if you want to work for a place like the Nature Conservancy, it's not going to be your work in any one field that gets you hired. It's your interest in working in multiple fields at the same time. And so that's what brings inspiration to me in the work that I do, and that I hope in creating opportunities for students as well.
Javier.
Yeah, so I grew up right at the tail of the space shuttle program, and so just seeing the space shuttle go into space really got me excited about aerospace engineering. And so I studied mechanical engineering, then I went and pursued a PhD in aerospace engineering. And then towards the end of the program, I really started interacting with atmospheric scientists that were asking these very interesting questions about measuring wind fields and how we could use, they had tried doing the quote unquote easy stuff, which is just tacking sensors onto the drone. So, the question that came to me was, can you exploit the dynamic motion of the vehicle, and this kind of sounds a little bit technical, to infer wind, and that's what my dissertation was on. And just by being involved in this project, my world opened as to the many applications or the many challenges that I could address, and I actually turned down a job in industry, a well-paying job, to go do a postdoc. And because I made a decision, sort of going back to my community, my parents were, I'm the child of farm workers, and just realizing the impact that the environment has on communities. I wanted to develop technology that would have a positive impact in my community. And so that sort of kind of connecting back, this is why I decided to pursue this idea of starting a lab where I get to empower students. And I think that the thing that excites me the most is feeling like I can help students find their purpose helping out their communities, and so to me this is what makes this work special.
Great, thank you for sharing that.
This is always a really interesting question that I could take a long time answering, and I'll try to condense. So I think that, to start with, when I was thinking kind of academic kinds of questions when I was a senior in college myself, I was at school in New York City at a time in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, of great upheaval and social movement formations and transformations of neighborhoods and so forth, and I became really interested in what was going on there. But it was when I was going home in the summers I'm from Palo Alto in the South Bay, and seeing a lot of what I was learning about in New York, kind of like I was saying with Santa Cruz, happening in Palo Alto, and the uneven development between Palo Alto and East Palo Alto, right next to each other, yet diametrically kind of opposed in some ways and unequal, and learned this theory of how development in some areas can take advantage of underdevelopment in other areas. And benefits from one area can be obstacles to growth for another. That I started working with organizations between Palo Alto and East Palo Alto, and also learning the agricultural history of East Palo Alto, and worked for an organization called East Palo Alto Historical and Agricultural Society, and learning about how some of those inequalities started with an area that was unincorporated and that was largely rural, and another that was urbanizing around Stanford, and then there were these class differences between the areas that subsequently became racialized. And I just became fascinated with how the place that I had grown up was a manifestation of all of these things that I had been learning, and it helped me to think about my own development as a young person. And that, I think, made me kind of obsessed with wherever I happen to be living. So I think that a lot of my approach has been to focus intensively in the area where I am, which ended up then being in New York. I lived in New York for 20 years and wrote and studied a lot about New York, and then has been in the area around Santa Cruz, and then thinking about the climate impacts in relation to this really history of uneven development within our own region of the greater Santa Cruz and Monterey Bay area.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So the next question is specific for Javier. Autonomous technology, big data, they're really impacting lots of different areas. And you talked a little bit earlier about how the impact of technology on communities and others, but there's still a huge opportunity. Can you talk a little bit more about how fast-moving that area is and the potential if used correctly?
Yeah, so disclaimer, this is just my perspective, right? So my impression is that it's not moving fast enough, right? And this is sort of kind of why I feel this urgency to do things. For example, one of the big challenges in rural communities, we know it's air quality. So it's, people typically think about air quality being a problem of cities, right? But if you drive through the 5 or the 99, the Central Valley, you can see that air quality is a big problem. And so I think right now there's been some really positive things in or advances in the sense that communities are developing their own air monitoring projects. So in the absence of there being sufficient monitoring done by the government, the communities are doing that. But I think there's a tremendous opportunity for not only deploying, but for the communities themselves to, again, like I mentioned earlier, be part of the design of these systems and the management of the systems. Because once you get community involved in these aspects, at least the thing that comes to my mind is employment opportunities. And that can be of tremendous help, just beginning to help uplift communities in rural areas. So I think there's a lot more. I think farmers, farm workers, and then just the youth of these communities, they have a lot of intelligence, and we can learn from them. And not in a way of extracting that from them, but actually making them at the center of these solutions. Yeah.
Thank you. An opportunity to mention that we just found out that UC Santa Cruz, through the Ag and Natural Resources of the state of California, is going to have the first UC extension specialist, extension specialist in the state that's focused on technology and agriculture. So it's going to be helping the entire state adopt and think about and engage with communities about the best technologies that can be utilized to help farmers moving forward. Next question is specifically for Mike, and obviously know you're really interested in nature-based solutions to mitigate, adapt to climate change. What are the challenges we're facing in using nature over concrete? And how can we overcome some of those challenges?
Yeah, so we actually brought together a workshop recently of leaders in kind of 3 major fields. So we sort of think that there are kind of 3 major problems that we have to address. There's financing, measurement and verification, and the development of projects. And every time we talk to folks, actually right now, financing's not the problem. All the years that I worked in conservation, the number one thing when you put a sticky up on the board about what you were going to do is, well, we need to find money. Right now, folks say the money is out there. What we need is good projects. And that challenge is in demonstrating what the role of nature is, and then being able to do that in a replicable way so that those in, say, engineering firms and others can then more easily adopt those. One of the things that is helping in this regard is earlier this week, I was at the White House working with a bunch of economists across the agencies to improve the way that we do benefit cost analysis so that we can more easily incorporate nature and the protection of vulnerable communities into that. Because ultimately, those benefit cost analyses, or BCAs, is what drives a great deal of federal investment. And so the openness now to try to get nature more accurately reflected, the value of nature for helping us, is something that we are making great strides in. So some challenges, some opportunities.
Can you give any examples of projects that have successfully started moving forward as good examples of those?
Yeah, so I work very closely with the Army Corps of Engineers, and we look at a lot of projects. Right now, I would say we're doing a very good job in oyster reef restoration. We're doing miles of projects protecting coastlines with oyster reef projects. We're doing really tens of thousands of hectares of mangrove restoration projects in many places. a little bit less in marsh restoration. And then what we're working on very closely now is the development of better coral reef restoration projects, because they're really farthest behind in the protections. And we happen to be working, in this case, with DARPA on a project to design reef restoration projects that would protect coastlines, and really doing that in some quite innovative ways.
Thank you for that. And if anybody, there's a small little mangrove back in that room over there, and Mike can take you back there and tell you all about the mangroves. Okay, so the last question before I get to some of the questions that we had from the audience, if we have time, really to come back to the name of this series, and maybe ask each one of you, what inspires you in the work that you do? And Javier, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I mean, that's a loaded question. I think this year has felt very tough for me because I've been learning a lot in new faculty. But honestly, the thing that keeps me going is really the feeling of empowering students. And I think we really have this responsibility of not only just educating, but really helping students find their purpose. And I think for me, that's been very empowering. I'm still learning a lot. One of the things that I've ventured to do just in my first year, so I have about 12 undergraduate students working in my lab, which I get the sense that a lot of first year professors would be timid to do that. So for me, that has brought a lot of reward in my first year at UCSC.
Well, Javier stole my answer. So so students certainly, and the amazing undergrads and grads at UCSC inspire me all the time. And I think also, we spoke about the interdisciplinarity of the work that we do. And in terms of the current project, it was actually inspired to some degree when I went to the office of a colleague in environmental studies named Chris Wilmers, who runs the PUMA project at UCSC. And the initial form of the current project is called the Housing Habitat Project. And it was because I had been working on this a project called No Place Like Home that was about the housing crisis in the region, and finding all of these people that we had interviewed being displaced to these outlying areas. And those outlying areas were the same areas where habitat was being fragmented for the puma. And so I thought, maybe I'll go talk to Chris and think maybe there's some relationship between our work here. And he invited me in, and I still remember sitting on this couch in his office, and he was like, there is a connection. And this was years ago. We are still working. He is very much involved in this project. And we kind of expanded to thinking about the WUI and climate impacts in addition to conservation and habitat fragmentation questions. But just the openness of our campus and of folks in the sciences and the natural sciences and the social sciences, the humanities and arts to collaborate has been like infinitely inspiring for me. And I love working at UC Santa Cruz for that reason.
Mike.
Yeah, what inspires me the most is action. Really have appreciated the opportunity to be involved with so many great folks, both across campus and with our many partners, in being able to develop innovative approaches and put them into practice. And that, any given day that I feel like, geez, we actually have resulted in something that you can point to, that's what inspires me.
Well, thank you. You kind of must have read although I don't know how you would have, the first audience question. What are effective strategies for translating research on climate change into actionable changes at the government, community, and corporation levels? You talk to a lot of these groups,
yeah.
and trying to change, to move towards policy changes, to move entire. Mike's not going to be pretty quiet about this because he doesn't talk about himself a whole lot. He's trying to help change the way big insurance companies think about how do you insure nature, and make things change moving forward. So maybe you can say a little bit about that.
What I've found is that there is actually a great deal of openness to trying new things, but there's not that many practices. So, people are interested in the ideas, but then they need enough rigor behind them, and that's what we can bring on the campus side. So it's one thing to say that nature is valuable, but the insurance companies and then FEMA were willing to listen because we were able to take the same tools that they were using to value, say, the benefit of a seawall or some other strategy, and then apply that to nature in a way that we could say, hey, look, marshes in San Francisco Bay can reduce annual risks of flooding by 15 to 20%. And we're using your models. We're not making up new models here. We're using industry standard models to be able to do that. And so that's the sort of thing that we have always found, whether it's the Army Corps of Engineers or FEMA or insurance companies, investment companies. That's the thing that actually motivates change.
Thanks. And maybe, I don't know if Miriam's going to want to weigh in on this, but I think at least those of us that live in Northern California, but I think it's happening across the entire state, insurance companies are leaving the state. They're dropping homeowners policies left and right for people that live in the WUI and others. How is research like yours going to help the state government and others think about changes to that?
Yeah, this is something we're finding in the work we're doing right now. We're talking to people, and one of the major kind of hidden costs of living in these areas is, well, first of all, the kinds of disaster preparedness and mitigation work that people often have to do without having anticipated this or having the capacity to do it, and then losing their insurance. And there was actually just an article, I think it was in the Washington Post, about our region on this question, and focused on SoCal. And people who, for instance, already own their homes, without a mortgage, can do so without insurance legally, and many people are choosing to do that because they can't afford the insurance. And we're seeing that with a lot of seniors facing enormous risk in staying in these communities. And often these are people who have aged in place, don't have, have lived in these communities, had the capacity, no longer have the capacity to take care of their properties, and simply have nowhere to go because there isn't affordable housing, adequate affordable housing in town for them to move to. Meanwhile, so many people, need housing and so forth. So, that would be the scale of the housing that they might be leaving. And meanwhile, there are people who have the capacity to steward the land who don't necessarily have access. So one of the things we're seeing is that there's this disconnect between those who have the capacity and the means and those who don't. And then the job of the county, we're working with the county Office of Response, Recovery, and Resilience, who are trying to figure out how can they construct a proposal to connect resources to those who do want and have the capacity to stay in these areas, and how can they actually think about questions like a kind of managed retreat strategy, similar to what we see in areas of sea level rise, for folks in areas that are subject to fire. So this is a kind of beginning of a conversation, and I think statewide, on the insurance question, I don't mean to take too long, but I think that there is this question about how do we factor in the kinds of mitigations that people might be able to undertake in how people price insurance, and how would that be standardized? How would that be regulated? How would that, how would we make sure that people have the capacity to engage in those kinds of activities in order to bring down costs? And so I feel like we're just at the beginning of that conversation. Thanks.
All right, so we only have a couple minutes left, but one question that we got that I think it's a question that gets asked by a lot of people, and I think it's a really important question. Can you give examples of what can people do today, to help the climate crisis in their own lives? if anybody wants to weigh in on that. That's, again, a pretty loaded question.
Well, I'll start. So, you'll often get a variety of, well, you should vote or some other answers like that. But for those of you who have investments, maybe even investment managers, I would say one of the important things that you can do is to ask them, how are they thinking about climate risk in their or your portfolios? My guess is you're actually going to get some pretty dumb answers to start, and because I've tried, and the answers aren't great. But it's only by starting to ask that question, and you should actually be getting some better answers because of various actions like the SEC has been, the Securities and Exchange Commission, has been trying to implement, where companies actually do have to report on their climate risks. So this is one of those places, just like from the past when you started asking questions about where did my seafood come from, you ought to be asking questions about where does my money go?
Anybody else want to weigh in?
Yeah, that's great advice. One of the things, so this is actually a conversation I had with one of my students that's double majoring. So they're studying political science, and they're also a minor in stats. And so, the student was asking me, how can I combine these two things to really address some of the difficult problems around climate change? And so she was going through the list. She was like, I feel frustrated with the things that are happening at the national level, so I don't feel like I can do anything. At the state level, same thing. And then we sort of kind of had this aha moment that, yes, sometimes it can feel like there isn't much hope, but I think one of the things is to focus on the things where we can quickly gain some momentum or inspiration. And so I would encourage people to get involved in local efforts, because that's where you can see the change the quickest, even if it's just a behavioral one. And I think that's really good for building up momentum for the marathon that's ahead of us.
I think that it's such an important question, and as a social scientist and thinking about things kind of socially, I think it's a great point that we can think about it at multiple scales, and we can think about it locally, and I think to the degree that we can think about it collaboratively, it's so often like with these incredibly thorny problems like climate change, this kind of blind men and the elephant situation where we're all addressing it from these variety of angles. And what happens when you start to combine these efforts. And so, to the degree that I've been thinking about this entanglement, really, of, the housing crisis and the climate crisis, what happens when the people focused on the housing talk to the people focused on the climate and those focused on conservation and come together? And there have been some very exciting opportunities for that, but we're going to start locally. What does it mean when a community land trust that's focused on housing starts talking to a conservation land trust that's focused on, on acquisitions of land, and starts talking to those who are really concerned about, issues of air quality and greenhouse gas emissions, and we can come up with regional planning solutions that would address all of those issues, in combination. And if you could manifest that as a model on a local scale, what would that mean on a larger scale? So, and I feel, again, that Santa Cruz is this amazing laboratory for doing that kind of experiment. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, I'd like to ask all of you to thank our three speakers today, Mike, Javier, and Miriam. We really appreciate all of your insightful comments. And I also want to thank all of you for being here and continuing to be interested and engaged with UC Santa Cruz. We ask you, there's going to be dessert outside, so ask you to join us for that. Continue the discussion amongst yourselves with new people you might have met here tonight, and come up and talk to our three guests about the work they're doing, and they'd be happy to talk to you more about that. And just want to say, again, we're really grateful for all the support that you give UC Santa Cruz.